Hello and welcome to another episode of the Burn Desire Show. And today I'm joined by Daniel Tolson. So welcome, Daniel.
Charles, thanks for being here. My pleasure.
You'll probably notice Daniel's audio is significantly better than mine, albeit Daniel did help me very kindly before change some Zoom settings. So maybe mine's a bit better than it used to be, but we're going to work on getting a microphone and I promise we'll sort that out. So as everyone that watches or listens knows, like I'm very interested in people's history as to how they got to where they are. I say it pretty much every time, but I think it's worth repeating. One of my favorite quotes, and the paraphrasing, is the Steve Jobs quote that he gave at Stanford when he was giving the passing out speech, for want of a better phrase. And he says, you cannot connect dots going forwards, only backwards. And so I think it's really interesting to figure out, like, particularly you've got a super interesting past, how that relates to where you are now, and indeed where you're trying to go, what you're trying to do. So I always like to do that kind of thing. So starting pretty early on, I don't know how old you are. If you could tell us, that'd be great. You had this learning disability called linear sequential learning disability. When did that come about? How old were you? What is it? What does it actually mean in terms of practically for you? And yeah, tell us a bit about that, please.
So I'm 41 now. I'll be 42 this year. And I was diagnosed with linear sequential learning disability at age 11. So there was a couple of things that were leading up to that. So I'd be out on the playground, I'd be running around with the kids, and my legs would collapse, a little bit like Forrest Gump. And so I was having these problems with my knees. And then I was having problems with my hips. I was having problems with my back. And then I was having these bleeding noses. The nose would just bleed. And so we knew something was wrong. And then when I was about 11, I just collapsed at home. And my mum said it was like I collapsed like a bag of bones on the ground. And so they started to do a couple of more tests. They realised that my spine was curved, my neck was out of alignment, and the cranial plates were pushing down the left and right hemispheres of the brain. And that was creating the pressure build-up, which was creating nosebleeds, which was preventing me from seeing properly.
Wow.
And I was also tone deaf. And now I've got this linear sequential learning disability. So it's hard for me to learn in a linear manner. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm looking at the school board. I can see what's on there. But by the time I looked at the board, brought the information inside, and then wrote on my paper, nothing matched up. I'd be reading a book, and my eyes were looking at the words, but I was bringing in the words at different times. So if I'm looking over here on the left-hand side of the book, I'm gathering these words from the right-hand side of the book, and I'm saying all the right words, but there's just no order and sequence to it. It's just a jumbled mess, blah, 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 blah. And I remember the kids at school laughing at me, but I thought they must have thought it was funny, but I didn't realize they were laughing at me. And so life started to get pretty hard at around about age 11. And then not long after that, I went into remedial therapy, and I was in remedial therapy for 5 years. And so they were spending 5 years to correct this problem.
So what does that mean? You were out of school at that point in time? You went to a different school, or it's like a full time thing, or was this remedial therapy just in the passing, like in the background?
So they put me in a room at school for a while called the Space Lab, and I thought that was pretty cool. I thought it was for all the kids who were going to be astronauts, but it was for the kids who were just off the bloody planet. And they didn't know what to do with. So I went in there, and
This
for
is
me,
not
that was
Australia,
just kind
sorry,
of,
for context. This is where you've brought
yeah,
up.
this is Australia. Yeah, in the western suburbs. So it was pretty cool. You know, nobody really made a drama of it. The teachers were pretty cool about it. And I'd go to school. I wasn't getting the grades that I should be getting. So I was going through that challenge of reading these report cards every quarter. You know, Daniel doesn't try hard enough. If he only paid attention a little bit more, he'd be a good student. That was tough because I was giving it everything that I could. I really was. I was working hard, and I'd always had to work harder than all the other students. Nothing came easy. I remember even playing sports. My brother just kind of did everything so easy, but it took me, 4, 5, 6 times longer to do the exact same thing. So I'd put in a lot of effort, but the reward and the output was never there. So for 5 years, I'd do some really bizarre things. I remember they were correcting my vision, and I'd go to a special optometrist, and he'd sit me in a room on a bar stool. He'd bring a tennis ball down from the ceiling, and then he'd plonk it right down in front of my eyes, and he'd flick it. And then all I was allowed to do was to watch the ball go around the room with my eyes to retrain my eyes. So you're doing this type of stuff, and you're like, Fun the first time, but after months of it, there's something wrong with you.
Like
And so I'd
torture
go through
almost, you
that.
know?
What was that?
Like a torture that almost to an extent.
Yeah, yeah, it was really bizarre. And nobody really explains what's going on. You're just like, okay, I've got to do all this extra stuff. I'd go to this special chiropractor, and he would be doing the back realignments, and it was the most painful thing. And I just seemed to be there all the time, getting this curvature out of the spine. And then I'd go for these cranial massages. Now, I love to go for a massage, but I'll tell you what, the pressure they used to put on my head to realign these plates. And it was because the platelets were pushing down the left and right hemispheres. So that created the visual impairment.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm having musical therapy. And this was probably the worst because the music teacher, he had 3 Alsatian dogs, German shepherds, long hair. And his house freaking stank like dog hair, smelled like dog piss. There was just hair everywhere. And he'd use green oil. The Chinese use it. And so you got this stench of fucking dog hair. You got this green oil. And I've got to go for singing lessons. And so they're trying to correct the sound and they're trying to help me hear properly. And I'm trying to be a boy soprano. And a boy soprano just sounds like a cat screaming like at the top of their voice. I can't even hear the difference between notes. And he's hitting away at the piano and everything sounds the same. And then like that doesn't work. And then they get me playing guitar. And I'm playing guitar and they're sending me to the Conservatorium of Music and I'm having musical therapy. I can't bloody hear the notes. And I'm making these mistakes and everybody's going, oh, he's making a mistake. And I'm like, everything sounds the same. And so I remember my mum at this stage, this must have been going on for years. She cracked the shits and she got my guitar and she just put it over her head and smashed it down on the ground. And she had enough of it. And so, yeah, it was interesting times for about 5 years.
So you obviously overcame, and we'll come into that in a second, all those kind of physical, mental, and emotional challenges. Fast forwarding a little bit now as to what you do in your coaching, we'll come to that, of course, in more detail. Do you find you draw upon a lot of those experiences and the overcoming of the challenges and becoming successful in what you end up doing? Does that help a lot with your coaching, of your empathy, your huge and emotional intelligence? I know that, and I want to talk about that very much so. But just on a holistic view, those early experiences now, you look back at them, are you almost grateful for them because now you have this opportunity to help other people almost?
100%. I say I can profit from my pain, and that's the real key to it. And what I mean by that is that there was so many experiences that I had back then that they're now valuable to me. So the 5 years in remedial therapy, that was just the tip of the iceberg. What happened after that was really the deep structure. So after 5 years of remedial therapy, I got Epstein-Barr virus. I contracted chronic fatigue. I got teenage chickenpox.
Sorry, what is Epstein-Barr virus?
Oh, that's a good one. Epstein-Barr virus. They call it the kissing disease. So they say Epstein-Barr virus and chronic fatigue, glandular fever, they kind of all hang around together. So it attacks the immune system. And it's an immune disease, immune disorder. So for me, how it impacted me was I would get sick. I would be getting tonsillitis, like 3, 4, 5 times a year, non-stop. And then after I'd get the tonsillitis, I'd just be fatigued. My body would be worn out. I'd be totally drained. And I remember at school, I stopped going to school for quite a while because I was sleeping, 15, 16, 17 hours a day. And I remember one day I got this picture in my mind where I was laying out in the family room and my head was just hanging off the end of the bed. And all I could see was upside down looking back into the kitchen. And I thought to myself, I'd love to move my head right now. But the head was cocked back over the back of the bed. And I was like, I can't even move my head. I was that tired. So at that stage, I couldn't go to school. And by the time I eventually went back to school, I was so far behind everybody else that I just couldn't keep up. So the teacher said, look, you're better off not to come back unless you're going to repeat. It just got that bad. So that was age 17. And then the following 2 years after that, I had 2 major knee surgeries and ended up being in operations and rehabilitation for another 2 years. So that was just the tip of the iceberg.
So at this point in time, at 17, you've had a lot of difficulties, medical difficulties, put them at that for right now. Well, how did you feel though yourself? Did you feel that why is it happening to me? Why is everyone else fine? Did you just take it on the chin? It is what it is. Like, and how do your parents deal with it? Like, what were you thinking at this point in time?
Well, I remember when I was probably in kindergarten, age 5, and we got these caterpillars. They're called Spitfire caterpillars. And if you touch the Spitfire caterpillar, it's got these little hairs and they get stuck into you and it feels like you're burning. Now, I remember at age 5, I was at school and I was watching these two caterpillars crawl across the asphalt. Mm-hmm. And the kids kept calling out to me saying, "Oh, Daniel, come and play. Daniel, come and play." And I was like, I don't want to play with you guys. I'm more interested in watching these caterpillars. So for me, I think I was already off in my own world. And I'm very introverted. And even when I went to school, I was very introverted. And I used to think to myself, you know, if knowledge is power and the more you earn, the more you learn, why the hell isn't this librarian a billionaire? So I had my own little wacky sense of humour. And I was in my own little world and I really didn't care too much. I remember first day of high school, I remember it was really embarrassing for me at the time. I got to school. I didn't really want to talk to anybody. I was introverted. I didn't need to talk to anybody. My mum introduced me to a guy and she says, "Oh, hello, what's your name?" And he says his name. I still remember his name. His name's Dean Toe. I could remember this clearly. And he's like, "Oh, my name's Dean." And my mum says, "Well, this is my son's Daniel." And then my mum looks at me and goes, "You've just made your first friend." And I was like, oh my gosh, how embarrassing. And I had to see this guy every day at school. And I was so embarrassed about that. But as an introvert, I didn't need friends per se. So going through school, I found a couple of other people who were like me. They became good friends. I was always in trouble from the teachers. But I thought to myself, I said, I knew it back then. I was just like, you can't see my intelligence. You think I'm stupid because I can't pass. Can we swear on the podcast?
Go for it.
Yes or no?
Go for it.
I was like, you can't see my fucking value. You're putting me through these fucking tests, yet this is not what my special skill is. You're labeling me against other academic kids, but this is not my strength. And I used to just think to myself, these people are fucking idiots.
What kind of
and
age?
That was my attitude.
What kind of age did you kind of conceive that as an idea?
13. I remember it. Getting kicked out of class for asking intelligent questions that the teacher couldn't answer. And I'd go into things like techniques and woodworks and design and tech, and I'd go into the P&T classes, the PT classes, and I'd absolutely kill the subjects. I knew it all. There was things that I just seemed to know, but when it came to these other subjects that I wasn't interested in, I started to think, maybe there's actually nothing wrong with me.
Okay.
I think I'm super smart. But maybe it's a teaching disability. Maybe there's something wrong with these teachers. And I really had this thought back then that maybe these people just don't know how to teach me.
Interesting. And on that point, I talk a lot about this as well, that school's far too prescriptive. And it's very well documented. If you look at why school's the way it is, it's all to do with the Industrial Revolution and we needed people to do certain jobs. And so they were taught to do jobs and hasn't moved on since then. If you had the power to do this, and maybe you will one day, how would you change it? How would you alter it? I mean, I did also an interview the other day with a Montessori educator, which is quite an interesting concept. Have you come across Montessori before?
Yeah, I got both of my kids in Montessori school.
Well, there you go. There you go. So how would you into when people get older, like what would you do and how would you kind of broad spectrum, how would you kind of change the education system to what it is now, in your opinion?
First thing, children need to understand why they're learning this topic. If a teacher would have said to me, "Daniel, pay attention because one day you're going to own a multi-million-dollar business and this topic of maths can help you make more money and invest more money," I would have been all ears. I would have paid attention. But in the school system, they tell you what you're going to learn and that's it. They don't tell you why you're learning it. And so kids, everybody needs motivation to learn. So there's no motivation to learn. If I went to the science lab and they said, "Daniel, you could develop tools for emotional intelligence that could record people's brainwave frequencies. And if you could pay attention here, you could learn some really awesome ideas to make that happen in the future." I had no idea why I'm going to the science lab. No idea. I'd go to the computer lab. Nobody said, "Daniel, in 2022, The world's going to be run by computers. You're going to do business online. You're going to be seeing people on videos and microphones all around the world. Pay attention. This could be $1 million idea. I would have paid attention. But nobody told me why I was learning. So there was no motivation for me. So what I've learned in years of teaching people how to learn correctly was we all must start with a why. Why am I learning this topic? Or why should I not be talking right now and paying attention? It's either why or why not. And so in adult learning, we learn this, but in the traditional school system, we don't. So how do I correct it today? Well, I have these conversations with my daughter on the way to school. I say, sweetheart, what are you learning today? She's 9.
Okay.
And I say to her, I say, cup noodles. I say, what are you learning today at school? She said, maths. And I said, why are you learning that? She said, I don't know. I said, well, maybe one day you want to buy mum and dad a house. Maybe you want to buy your grandparents a house. And you're going to need to know how to use money. Now, if you learn maths, you can make more money. We can live in a bigger house. And all of a sudden, what does she do? I love maths. And for all of the subjects she's doing, I'm talking to her about why she's learning, how this can help her achieve her goals. And she goes to school, and I've got to say, my daughter is what they call the model student. She is the model student. She is the number one in her year. She is consistently voted by her peers and her teachers as the model student. She's focused. She's disciplined. She wakes up early in the morning. She studies. She's got goals. She's got dreams. She comes home after school. She studies. I've never had to ask my daughter to study, but she's got motivation. That's the difference.
It's interesting. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just what you're talking about. A lot of the things you talked about as to the why are financially motivated. Is that just a reflection upon you? You're very financially goal orientated, or do you have other kind of levers and goals that are not as financially tied?
For me, I think motivation around money, it's something that everybody can understand. I think it's something that everybody can understand. So I think these examples, around money. But for me, money, what I learned when I got into real estate at age 19, money is only the reward for doing a good job. There's so much more that goes beyond that. So if we get back to this why, 35% of adult learning comes down to motivation. And if there's no motivation to learn, nobody learns anything. And on an economic planet, Charles, a lot of people, they think money's taboo and they don't like to talk about money. However, we live on an economic planet. This podcast, somebody's got to pay for the internet to watch it. This microphone, somebody's had to pay for it. The MacBook that you're using, somebody's had to pay for it. And money's important. However, money's also an extrinsic motivator, and money's like a drug. If you get $100, you want 110. Once you've had 110, you don't want to go back to 100. If you've earned £50,000 a year and you get a pay rise to 65, all of your expenses rise to meet your level of income. And what happens when you get to $65,000 or pounds? You don't want to go back to £50,000. It's a drug.
Yeah.
And so the problem with money, it's an external motivator. If you get it, you feel good. If it's taken away from you, you feel bad. But there's 3 types of motivation. The first one is biological. Whenever anybody says to you, I'm motivated, and even if they're the worst member on the team, everybody's motivated. It's just for the basics: food, shelter, water. And some people are happy with that. And if they're happy with that and they've got peace of mind, beautiful. The second level of motivation is extrinsic motivation. It's if-then motivation. But majority of the time, it's out of your control. Charles, if you do good at school, then you will get into university. But if you don't, you're not going. If you speed, we'll give you a ticket. If you make 100 sales, we'll give you a $10,000 bonus. But if you only make 99, you don't get the bonus. So it's if-then, and it's extrinsic. So money is an extrinsic motivator. The third level of motivation, which is a tough conversation for most people, it's called intrinsic motivation. It's doing things that make your heart sing. And ever since I was a young age, I've just done what made my heart sing. When I watched those 2 Spitfire caterpillars crawl across the asphalt at school, it made me happy. I was doing what I was doing. I didn't care what the other kids were doing. I was happy over here. So intrinsic motivation is what most people are missing. But the intrinsic motivation is what makes you whistle on the way to work. It's what makes your heart tick. It stops you from looking at the clock going, oh my gosh, 4:59, I'm counting down the seconds till we get out of here. You're doing what you love to do. You're living life with passion. You're living life on purpose. And so that's where my true motivation comes from. It's that intrinsic motivation.
Awesome. So coming back to your kind of story, we're at 17 years old. The teacher have basically said to you, you either repeat the last couple of years to catch up and go into a different age category, or you drop out of school. And I know what happens next, but go ahead.
Well, I said, I don't want to go to school because for me, it was not practical. I came from a family of self made millionaires. I came from a family of people who worked hard. And I looked at this and everything at school I was learning, I was like, this is so impractical. This doesn't have any place in the business world because I'm surrounded by these people who don't have a formal education, but they're far more successful in all areas in their life than these people that I could see being educated.
What do your family do?
So I said, I don't want to go back.
Sorry to interrupt. What do your family do work-wise?
Well, my dad's one of 12 children.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
I've got hundreds of relatives. So I'll give you an example. So from my mum's side of her family, my grandfather was in the Air Force. He got out of the Air Force. He was a builder. He started to buy taxis. He bought a bus company. He started to develop real estate. He bought dry cleaning businesses. He bought businesses and kind of vertically integrated his business where he was buying a factory that created coat hangers. So I was making coat hangers at a young age, using those coat hangers at our family dry cleaners. And then my grandmother, she retired, I think, in her mid-70s, and she had a haberdashery store. She was a dressmaker and she had businesses for 40 years, but she's also a real estate investor. So I had that. My parents were pawnbrokers, so they would buy and sell secondhand goods. So for my whole time at school, from age, I think, 11 to the time I left, I was always working in the family pawnbroking business, buying and selling secondhand goods. My dad was a concreter. He had a construction business as well. He was a farmer. He also had a farm. I've got cousins who employ 500 people in Sydney. So I was around these businesses. And so I looked at this little thing at school called a report card and went, you're going to judge me on my report card? You don't know what I know outside. So after I dropped out of school, I went to business college, and that was really good because I was dealing with people who were practical now, people from the real world. And I got real world experience, and I liked that. But then at age 19, after a couple of knee reconstructions, my uncle reached out to me and he said, hey, you're off the track. He said, you've gone crazy. And I said, yeah, I'm having a good time.
What were you doing
He
at
said,
this point? Were you just not doing anything? What was life like at this point?
Just being wild, drinking, smoking, chasing the girls. They called me Daniel Danger. I was a competitive athlete. I was competing in events like Extreme Games. Have you heard of Extreme Games before?
No.
Oh, it's like the Olympics for extreme athletes.
Right.
And so I was in the top 10 athletes in the world at that time, competing at Extreme Games. And so I had a privileged life. So I'd travel around the country, competing in water sports, in the magazines, in videos, on the television. And I was just a wild boy. I was having a great time. And he said to me, he said, hey, you got to get your life together. I said, well, what does that mean? He said, you got to come and get a job. I said, a job? Doing what? He said, selling real estate. And I said,
where was your income coming from at this point? Was it your parents helping you out at this point? Or
I would work with I always worked. So I started coaching water sports at age 16.
Right.
So I'd make good money from sports. I would work in nightclubs. I'd work at pubs and bars. I've always worked. I was a mechanic, and I'd work on the weekends during school as a mechanic.
Got you.
Covered in grease. So Michael says, hey, you got to come and work. I said, okay, rightio. What are we going to do? He said, we're going to sell real estate. And I said, well, I know nothing about real estate. He said, it's the only place in the world where you can write your own income without an education. Now, he also gave me a job at age 9, and I was a paper boy. Now, I used to be a paper boy at age 9. He taught me how to sell. So I'd sold newspapers for him, and now he's saying, come and sell real estate, and we're going to make a ton of money. And I said, well, what's a ton of money look like? He said, well, if you follow the plan, you'll buy your first investment property within a year's time from now. And he said, I'll even put my money where my mouth is, and we'll do it together. I said, okay, you're on. So he set me a goal and he gave me a book. And he said, if you follow this book and these principles of success, you can be, do, and have anything that you want. And he gave me a book called Maximum Achievement.
Okay.
And it was by an author by the name of Brian Tracy. I don't know if you've heard of him before. He wrote the book Eat That Frog.
No.
An American author. He's written 74 books. And yeah,
Maximum.
nice guy.
There you go. Maximum
Achievement.
Achievement. Yeah.
Yep. And he gave me this book, and on the inside cover, he wrote a message, and it said, "To Danny boy, this is your blueprint of success." And he taught me how to apply the principles in this book. And within 6 months, I was in the top 10 sales creators in the country.
Okay. Not sure what happened there, so apologies if this is slightly like higgledy-piggledy. But from where I got to, and hopefully the recording is in the same state, you were just saying that your uncle had given you this book called Maximum Achievement by Brian Tracy. And he said, follow this book. By the end of the year, you're age 19 now, you will have your first investment property, and I will actually also work alongside you. Continue from that
100%.
point.
So there I am. I'm in sales now. He taught me how to sell. And he said, what I want you to do is I want you to buy your first investment property so you know what it's like to go through. Now, this was the early stages of emotional intelligence. You know, he was teaching me, he said, Daniel, what you've got to learn to do is you've got to learn to read the emotional makeup of other people. You've got to understand what the emotional journey is like going through real estate. He said it's one of the most stressful times of your life if you're buying or selling a property. So here I am, age 19, buying my first property. And I was stoked because here I am and I'm making more money than the teachers who were telling me I'd never succeed because I didn't have a formal education.
Mm-hmm.
So at that stage, I'm saying, well, this is interesting. I've got these skills that I couldn't learn at school, but now I'm being rewarded for them in the real world. So I go from success to success. We open up some new offices. I'm working out of these new offices and my targets are going higher. My income's getting higher.
Your own company, sorry. No, there's a company that you and your uncle started or something. Is this what you started?
This was my uncle's business. Yeah. And whilst I was working with him, we opened up a series of offices. So he was very successful. He was
already in real estate, this guy. Your uncle was already in real estate when he spoke to you, was he?
Yeah, well, he started working in this business as an employee, and he'd become so successful in sales that his business partner looked at him and said, "This guy's good," and gave him half the business.
Wow, that's amazing.
So the business just started to grow. There was one location in St. Clair. We then moved to St. Mary's, and then we opened up a satellite office out in a place called Emerton. So I went out to this new remote office and I worked from there, and I was getting a ton of work out there. And so that was happening. And then I thought to myself, what's the next goal? And
what
so
were you actually doing?
Said, well, why don't...
So in real estate, was the company, was it buying real estate? Was it like a broker? Like what were they actually doing, the nuts and bolts of the business? Sorry.
So we call this a real estate agent. So my core job was to prospect, present, and close. So I'd go out and I'd prospect for people who wanted to sell their house. Mm. So the job was knocking on doors, going from house to house.
You're going to learn a lot by doing that.
Then my job was to list the property, which is to bring it to market, and then to market and sell it. That was my role.
And you got a commission based off what you sold, take it.
And then commissions. So the company in and of itself had started out as sales, but as they become more successful, they started to branch out into property management as well.
Sure.
As it grew. So I'm coming up to 21 and I'm doing really well, making a ton of sales. And my parents said, well, why don't we buy another property? So I'm buying my second investment property at age 21. And for me, I was really proud of myself because I had proved to myself that you didn't need a formal education to become successful in your career. Mm-hmm. And so as I got to the end of age 21, coming up to the year 2022, I felt that I'd achieved everything that I wanted to achieve in real estate.
How
And there was
successful
really
were you?
something.
Sorry, you say you were top 1%. What does that mean? You're earning $1 million a year? Like, how do you measure that? Or is it just the amount of sales that you were volume that was going through? How's that work?
So in real estate, you get to write your own paycheck. So a company will say to you, well, if you want to earn a $35,000 base salary, which was that at the time, and then we had 3.6% commissions, which on an average property of about $200,000 was about $7,200 commission per
Yeah,
property
yeah.
back in 1999, 2000, and 2001. So my first target was to list 7 properties and sell 5 per month. So 7 sevens are 49, could be bringing in $49,000 worth of month's commissions into the business.
Amazing.
And then as I got better, you go to a higher base salary, so a $45,000 base salary. Now this was back in, year 2000. It's a lot of money back then. And then I think my record month was like 14 listings and 12 sales. So in
Wow.
terms of the numbers and the volume that I was writing, it was really good. But beyond that, it was the customer satisfaction. I learned from my uncle back then. It was about customers for life. And so I developed all these beautiful relationships with people along the way. And that was the key to it. I made lovely, lovely connections, people who were very supportive of what I did. And most of my business came to me through referrals. And that's how you know you're doing good at real estate. It's when one home seller says to another, he's only 21, but God, he's good. And so people would give me their biggest asset. And that's a huge privilege. You're 21 years of age. You're struggling to get hair under your arms. You can't grow a beard yet. And people are saying, hey, I've worked 30 years to pay off this house, and I'm going to give you my largest asset. Now, that's trust. And trust is a key component in emotional intelligence. So I was learning all these wonderful things. And then I decided what's next. And I went to the UK in the New Year's Eve of 2002, and I went on a journey of self-discovery.
On purpose or by chance?
On purpose.
Why
Said,
you just
that's
felt I've
it.
got money? I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Is it that kind of thing? Like what made you do this? You're
I wanted
successful.
more.
Okay,
I
more
wanted
in what
more.
sense?
I wanted to know who I was.
Okay,
I wanted to know what made me tick. I had goals and ambitions that I'd had parked for many years. And I thought to myself, how far can I go in life?
okay,
And if I want to achieve something new, I've got to stop doing something old.
yep.
So I went to the UK, flew in there, New Year's Eve 2002, picked up a magazine that said, work on a dairy farm in Ireland.
Okay.
And so, like it must have been, I reckon, a week. I was over in Ireland in Limerick City. You've probably heard of that one
Yeah,
before.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Probably
limericks
the
are a
roughest.
famous limericks are a famous kind of form of poetry as well. I don't know if they come from
Yeah,
that. I imagine they probably do, but maybe not.
yeah,
Let's go with it. They do.
yeah.
Carry on.
One of the roughest places at the time, and I went over there and worked on a dairy farm. And I thought to myself, hey, I can work on a dairy farm. My uncle was a dairy farmer. I've milked cows before. And I got over there, and the guy who was hosting me, he was like Hannibal Lecter. And I got this bad vibe, and I thought, if I stay here for more than a day, this guy's going to skin me alive.
Mhm.
And so I got to his dairy farm, stayed by night, and I pissed off the next day. I ran away and never went back.
Talking
And then I
about
started.
getting vibes, this also comes from emotional intelligence. I think very much so. That's something I talk about a lot with different people I speak to and on my platform and stuff. Like gut instinct or vibes, I'm going to call it. Like I think people don't use them enough because I've also read Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman or Kahneman, what his name is, and he talks about this as well. That like if, he talks about an example that I think in this book where somebody like a nurse was basically like she's not on duty. One of her family members, she's like looking at them and she's like something's not up. I don't know what it is, and it turned out they've got a heart attack because now it's not like divine intervention. Like this person's got so many hours of experience that they just sense something's up, or a fireman can sense something's going to happen. Like you hear about this quite a lot with people, and I think in the everyday life, people who are not in professions but just in everyday life, you walk into a room, you're like, something's off here. Like if there's been just an argument, you can just tell something's not quite right. Or people are acting a bit weird. Or you go into a business and it's the first day and you're on the sales floor and like the way people are acting and I don't think people enough go off like that doesn't feel right. Let's not go with that. I think people often just kind of just go with it. They go with the flow. They kind of let life happen to them. The favorite Tony Robbins quote: let life happen to them rather than for them," or they perceive it that way. What's your opinion on this?
Well, there's three forms of intelligence, and we have three brains in our body. The first brain is our head brain, the second one is our heart brain, and the third one is our gut brain. And the gut brain's also called the enteric brain. Now, the enteric brain is reported to have about 500 billion neural connections. It's the biggest brain in the body. It's the biggest form of intelligence. And we used to trust our gut instincts. And when we were in the pawnbroking business, before we knew what emotional intelligence was, we were street smart and we had the ability to what we would say is read the play. Now, a lot of people don't trust their gut intuition because they don't know how intuition works. So intuition is your ability to traverse logical levels of thinking, the ability to get a feeling, see what the bigger picture is, and then bring it back down to something that you can comprehend. So, for example, your unconscious mind is symbolic and it responds to symbols. So if, for example, let's have an example. What could we say? At an unconscious level, you might see an image of a black cat in your mind. Now, that black cat automatically might mean to you danger. And so your unconscious mind will present you a symbol, a black cat, and then you'll go, oh my gosh, danger's about. And then all of a sudden you'll stop, pause and think. Now, when it comes to intuition, men's and women's intuition is exactly the same. The difference is women tend to listen to their intuition where men don't. Now, I'll tell you the truth. It happened to me today. I've got a video on my Facebook page, and if anybody wants to go there, it's the 28th of February today. Have a look at my post from 28th of February. I took my daughter bike riding today, and she's 9, and I wanted to take the training wheels off. Now, most people think 9's too old to have training wheels on. Well, I agree it is. We just haven't had the opportunity because of COVID to get out there and really do some good riding. Mm-hmm. So today was the day that I decided that I'd take the training wheels off. I got her out there, and after 5 minutes, she's riding with no training wheels like she's been doing it for years. And then I said, sweetheart, let me show you what I can do on the bike. So I got on the bike, and then after about 3 circles, I stood up on the back of the bike where the baggage rack is. I put 1 foot on there and I put 1 foot on the frame, and I started to surf on the bike. Have you ever seen bike surfing before?
No.
So here I am bike surfing. It's like I'm surfing on the bike and I'm showing off to my daughter. And in the back of my mind, that little voice is saying, Daniel, don't do this. Don't do this. You're going to crash. You're going to crash. And all of a sudden I said to myself, I should hop back down, but I was too busy showing off to my daughter. And then I went straight over the handlebars. And I had a huge crash. Man, I went rolling along the floor and she's filming me. Oh. And then I thought to myself, oh, gee, I heard something crack. And I thought to myself, I better get back up on the bike because you never know who's watching. You know, if I fall down and I don't get back up, what does that tell my daughter about resiliency? So being resilient, I got back up on the bike, straightened the handlebars, and did the exact same thing again. But I should have listened to my intuition.
No, I'm interested. So there's a lot more I want to talk to you about. I haven't done this before, so it's a new thing for me. But I'm wondering whether we stop here, we'll release this part as part 1, and then the week following we'll obviously schedule it ourselves, but we'll release a part 2. Because I'm also conscious of your time, and I think there's so much more that I want to talk to you about that's super interesting. I don't want to rush it, and I think you're a very interesting character, and I'm very much enjoying the conversation. So maybe my own selfishness, I'm just saying I want more time. Let's put some more time in.
I gotta take more notes.
Yeah.
We can do that. I can do that for you, and I can do that for your audience. I'll be more than happy to.
That'd be awesome. I'm just going to pause recording here, and then I'll patch the other 2 together, and we'll figure it out.
Let's do it.
Perfect.